This is a Center for Moral Clarity moment. President Bush's qualified candidates for positions on federal appeals courts face judicial filibusters unless Senate rules are changed to allow a fair vote on their nominations. Liberals in the Senate, who oppose the judicial branch's traditional role, that of interpreting laws, have promised to block votes for the president's candidates. Many of these candidates have already been denied seats on the bench because of last session's unprecedented judicial filibusters. Pastor Rod Parsley has urged Senate leaders to allow these judges' confirmation votes to take place. He said members of the Center for Moral Clarity and all believers should call their U.S. senators this week to insist on a fair up or down vote on all candidates approved by the Senate Judiciary Committee. The Center for Moral Clarity provides information and a directory of U.S. senators and other information at its website, www.centerformoralclarity.net. The Center for Moral Clarity, defending truth and shaping culture. This is a Center for Moral Clarity moment. Famine conditions in southern Sudan are becoming acute, putting more than 3 million lives at risk. January's peace agreement has brought an additional influx of people to the famine-ravaged area. Malnutrition, especially among children, is becoming rampant. The current dry season, which ends in May, offers opportunity for food aid to be delivered. Once the rains begin, transportation of food to remote areas becomes increasingly difficult. Seed and agricultural tools must
America's vision has dimmed. We have lost our focus. There is a crying need for moral clarity across this great country. At this critical juncture in our nation's history, God has raised up a visionary leader, Pastor Rod Parsley, the founder of the Center for Moral Clarity. From its inception, CMC's message has resonated with Christians from many faith traditions, and even with voters who don't claim a faith in Christ, but who are becoming increasingly receptive to the gospel. The message has also rung true with pastors from the entire spectrum of Christianity, who have found Pastor Parsley an effective leader and spokesman for this cause. Just 1 month after its birth, CMC led an unprecedented national church-based voter registration drive. More than 1,000 pastors led their congregations in signing up voters for the November election. As the 2004 election approached, God gave Pastor Parsley a national platform to speak for what political observers came to call values voters. CMC quickly became one of the nation's leading advocates of God's design for marriage. And Pastor Parsley made that issue the primary focus of his 17-city Silent No More tour. And mainstream America got it. On November 2nd, values voters responded, and by large margins they affirmed God's design for marriage everywhere the issue appeared on the ballot. In Ohio, Pastor Parsley brought the Silent No More tour to thousands of Christians in 6 cities, accompanied by Ohio Secretary of State Kenneth Blackwell. Some observers believe these efforts made the difference in the issue's passage and created the decisive margin in the national presidential election. In their search for understanding about the values voters phenomenon, the national media found an articulate spokesman in Pastor Rod Parsley. As the leader of one of the most diverse congregations in the nation, Pastor Parsley speaks with authority across racial and denominational lines as perhaps no religious leader in America. In just a short time, CMC has made a profound impact on our nation's culture, but the work has just begun. At the second Ohio Pastors Breakfast in January, attendance tripled, drawing nearly 600 church leaders. CMC is committed to holding these leadership gatherings throughout the year to further equip the church to speak out for biblical morality. With the publication of his newest book, Silent No More, Pastor Rod Parsley has cast a bold vision for a new moral and spiritual reformation for America. The national release of this groundbreaking book was celebrated by a rally at World Harvest Church, where thousands heard Ambassador Alan Keyes and commentator Ann Coulter support Pastor Parsley's call to cut across traditional party lines to stand for biblical morality instead of standing for political gain. Pastor Parsley immediately set off on a national tour to take the Silent No More message to diverse congregations across the country. In Colorado Springs, he was with Pastor Ted Haggard, the president of the National Association of Evangelicals, representing some 6 million believers of all denominations, and went directly from the service to an interview with NBC's Dateline. He then traveled to the heartland of Kansas, standing with the pastor whose church has been attacked by the mainstream coalition because of its moral stand. Then on to Atlanta, a city bathed in the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, where Pastor Parsley spoke in an African-American church, and in attendance was the state's lieutenant governor, a white Democrat who's running for governor on a biblical moral values platform. In Detroit, to the dynamic church of an African-American pastor who is running for the United States Senate as a Republican, and where Pastor Parsley was interviewed by one of the leading evening news anchors. This African-American reported that the Silent No More chapter on Islam was the best critique he had ever read, and this from a man who had been married to Louis Farrakhan's daughter and lived in the home of the Nation of Islam's leader for 2 years. Then on to Tennessee, where Pastor Parsley spoke in the pulpit of the man who had received the second highest number of votes for the presidency of the Southern Baptist Convention. And wrapping up the first week of the national tour in a largely Hispanic church in Virginia that organized the 1 million strong Washington for Jesus rally. This message cuts across traditional political and cultural lines and sounds a clear cry for a more moral America.
The Reformation Ohio Initiative. First of all, it's a 10-step plan, and it's for over the next 3 years. First of all, we're going to conduct Reformation Assembly weekends. These will be around the state of Ohio, from Cleveland to Youngstown and from Athens to Cincinnati and all across the state. I'll be zeroing in my interest and my time and our staff's interest and time to cooperate with other local churches in Reformation assemblies, which will be educational and evangelistic. They will last all week long. We will go in and train pastors. We will train youth leaders, because I don't know if you noticed it or not, but in the past presidential election, John Kerry's number one age group that he received votes from were 18 to 24-year-olds. President Bush received the most votes from the 60-year-olds and older. We are losing a moral generation in America, and we've got to again focus on our posterity, on those that we are raising up behind us. We are never a success until we have created our successors. So I'm going to go around the state, and then that weekend will end pointing forward to a Reformation Assembly Mission America crusade, where I will preach the gospel of Jesus Christ in auditoriums and stadiums around this state, and we are going to see, in the name of God's Christ, 100,000 people born again and accept Christ as Savior in the state of Ohio in the next 3 years, God being our help. Listen, it doesn't do any good to talk about judicial tyranny and social reform until we reach out and touch the hearts of humanity. The church must never forget that our first calling is to go into the highways and the byways and compel them to come to Christ. Once the church loses sight of that, then the church is ineffective at becoming an agent of change into the society into which God has infused it. Thirdly, we want to help register and educate 375,000 new new voters. That represents a 5% increase in registered Ohio voters over the 2000 election cycle. We want to register 5% more people in the state of Ohio, 375,000 new voters. We will be launching, and this is one of the most exciting things, but we are going to launch a values voters organization for African Americans in the state of Ohio. When I traveled the state with Secretary Blackwell back in November, and we would go into great African American churches where God has given us an incredible amount of favor, and I thank God for it. I know why it's there. And when I traveled the state, I watched the eyes of African Americans who had been steeped in not only some religious tradition, but certainly in a political quagmire where they were promised the rainbow and delivered the rain. I watched their eyes come alive as the church shined the spotlight on the values that for too long had been taken for granted. And when African Americans in the state of Ohio saw that marriage was under attack and that we had to defend marriage being the union of one man and one woman, they stood up beside us shoulder to shoulder. And I'm here to tell you that they will do it again on other moral issues if they just have sufficient leadership. We're going to establish, number 5, a Center for Moral Clarity chapter in every one of Ohio's 88 counties. Now, I met with members of the World Harvest Church Ministerial Fellowship, 2,000 churches across America, and last night their leadership pledged with me that they are going to raise up a Center for Moral Clarity chapter in every state that is represented by those 2,000, in every county of every state represented by those 2,000 ministries. We're not going to let this thing lie dormant. We're going to breathe the life and the energy of vision into it. Then we want to begin students. Here's another one close to my heart. Students for Moral Clarity programs in high schools and college campuses throughout the state of Ohio. We're already coming into partnership with the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And if you want to, I'm just going to tell you, MTV and VH1 have never seen the likes of 18 to 24-year-olds on fire for God and ready to change their generation. Number 7, we're going to increase minority participation in the electoral process through educational programs and get out the vote campaigns. Then we're going to enlist 1,000 churches that represent at least 200,000 Ohioans for immediate email prayer alerts. Ninthly, we're going to organize a Center for Moral Clarity action team in each county, equipping each team to generate same-day response to members of the Ohio General Assembly on key moral issues. Now, you have to understand, what I'm doing in Ohio, and some of you don't understand, is I'm stepping back from a more national platform. That's where I've been for the past 15 years. As I just shared with you, we speak to the potential audience of 97% of this nation 6 days a week, twice a day. We're going to zero in our efforts in the state of Ohio for one reason and one reason only. That's what the Holy Spirit spoke to my spirit, that there is to be a spiritual revival and moral reformation that begins in the state of Ohio, where the attention of the nation is focused and the shock waves to be felt throughout this entire nation. I still believe that America can have a third great awakening. Lastly, we're going to strengthen the Breakthrough Television program in Ohio, more stations. We are already reaching 7.7 million people in Ohio by television 6 days a week, twice a day. We're going to increase that coverage, and we're going to add an Ohio radio broadcast so that we can give Center for Moral Clarity moments and keep folks updated across the great Buckeye State. If there's anything I refuse to become, it's another screaming voice. On one interview this week with the largest African-American secular radio station in Atlanta, Georgia. Now, it covers most of the state of Georgia. It has a huge outlet. Secular fully African American station, and they want to interview me. Well, when I get on there, they think all I'm going to talk about is abortion, and they're coming from that angle. They're coming from the angle that I'm just some far right-wing, white bread, milk toast, milk sop, typical evangelical, and then they get me on the air, and people start calling in saying, this is the greatest thing I've heard. I've never heard anybody talk like this. I've never heard anybody stand up for issues that are central to our faith, too. And so I get out of that interview. This is an African-American secular station. I mean, they're hitting me with stuff, you know, it's not real user-friendly. You understand? But by the end of the interview, they're saying, I never heard it on this wise. I never heard anyone be informed about the issues that are central to our faith too. I never heard anyone that wants to talk about poverty the way that you do, and that wants to talk about women's rights the way that you do, and that wants to talk about race issues the way that you do. And then I hang up on that interview, and I get on another interview with the third largest white Christian right-wing radio network in America. And then they don't know what to do with me, because I'm taking issues that belong to one and commend them to the other, and issues that belong to this side and commend them to that side, and doing what ancient Samuel did, stand right in the middle. I refuse to be another screaming voice moving people to radical extremes in the name of patriotism. We've got to cut through the clutter of these conflicting extremes, and we can reach a common sense consensus. I'm going to say it again, a common sense consistence, even in the midst of polarized and inflamed passions. Because to be morally consistent, folks, is to be politically unpredictable. As our First Lady said, this isn't about politics, this is about spirituality. This is a fight for the life and soul of the greatest Christian nation on the earth, and the only counteractant to Islam in the world. We are it. We've got to stand up. God is watching. Our times demand it, our history compels it, our future requires it, and God is watching. We must move people first to compassion, then to wisdom, then to duty. When I sit down in front of Dennis Miller, who is an agnostic, he is an economic conservative, but he is a social liberal. And I know what he's going to ask me. He's going to ask me about homosexual marriage. I know he's going to. So he asked me about how I feel about homosexual marriage. So I say to Dennis, of course I'm not for homosexual marriage, nor am I for 1 out of 6 of our children going to bed every night hungry. Nor am I for a woman earning 78 cents on the dollar what a man earns. Nor am I for an African-American male with a bachelor's degree earning 75 cents on the dollar what a Caucasian man with a bachelor's degree earns in the same job. And before he can get his breath, he rears back in his chair and says, well, you threw me a zinger there. Wisdom first. Wisdom. Then duty. Compassion. Compassion says, I'm against homosexual marriage, not because Romans chapter 1 says so, but because the average life expectancy of a homosexual and a lesbian are 43 and 45, and the life expectancy of the rest of the population is 75 and 79. I'm against homosexual marriage because only 1% of the homosexuals living in the United States today are 60 years of age. A heart of compassion says this isn't right, and somebody's got to tell these people the truth. Let me give you 5 or 6 days of our life. 5 or 6 days of our lives. On Saturday night a week ago, we launched this book, Silent No More, Bringing Moral Clarity to America While Freedom Still Rings. We launched it. We had Ambassador Alan Keyes with us, and Brad Stein with us, and also Ann Coulter with us, who the next day, well, the next Monday, appeared on the cover of Time magazine. So from the World Harvest pulpit to the cover of Time magazine, that's the kind and caliber of people that are coming in here. We did that on Saturday night, and then on Sunday morning, we had an unbelievable service. On the front row was Secretary of State Blackwell. Now watch this. The possibilities of this nation are so great. On the front row is Secretary of State Kenneth Blackwell. Are you with me? Now, he wasn't entertaining Farrakhan. For those of you that read a newspaper, you know what I'm talking about. Wasn't entertaining Farrakhan. Sat right there on the front row. Here's an African-American man, statewide office holder, running for the governor of the state of Ohio, an African-American man in this mixed church, running on a faith, family, and values ticket for the Republican nomination for governor, a black man. You ought to be proud of that. Now, wait a minute. Now, wait a minute. Because we're not Republicans or Democrats. I'll prove it to you. I don't care if he runs on the Shumi-Numi ticket. If you're standing up for life, you're standing up for family values, you're standing up for a culture of dignity, you don't want to see babies murdered or homosexuals married, you got my attention. I don't care what ticket you're running on. Make up one. I don't care. And people of faith and values will show up to support you. Won't we? I said, then I left here Sunday morning. Sunday night, I was in Pastor Ted Haggard's church, Colorado Springs, Colorado, 7,500 seats. He is the president of the National Association of Evangelicals, representing 6 million evangelicals and over 200 different denominations. He's their leader. That's whose church I was in a week ago, Sunday night. I walked off his platform, down the steps and into a little room, and there's NBC Dateline waiting to interview me for an hour. I left there, that was on, and I went to Kansas on Monday night to one of our great, of course I was on the Bot Radio Network that morning for over an hour, reaching some 60, 75 million people. Then I went to Pastor Perky's church, Pastor Mike Perky. Why did I go there? The reason I went there is because he had the set of spies, people for the separation of church and state, that had come to his church, and the Associated Press had reported on it, that they were watchdogging him because of his association with me, whether or not he would say anything he should not say politically. So I decided to go help him. You don't need to talk to one of my sons. I'm here. I'm ready to talk now. And I'm not just about ready to be quiet while our First Amendment rights were taken from us in 1954 to speak the dictates of our hearts from the pulpit. I'm not going to say, what are you going to wait till they come and carry me off in a straitjacket because I said something before we stand up? This is America. This is America. We have a right to preach the gospel from our pulpits without fear of reprisal from the Internal Revenue Service or the federal government. I left there. I left there, and I went to, where did I go next? I went to Daystar. Marcus and Joni Lamb, second largest Christian network in the world. And I'm on Daystar with them. I went from Daystar, now watch this, to Divine Faith Ministries in Pastor Battle's church. I went to listen to this. You remember I told you about Secretary of State Ken Blackwell sitting on our front row? Now it's Tuesday night or Wednesday night. I'm in Pastor Battle's church, African-American church. They brought a man in kind of under guard and sat him on the front row. 6'4" white man. I don't know if he was nervous just because he was in an African-American church or what his problem was. They brought him down there and sat him down in the front row. I found he's crying, he's rejoicing while I'm preaching. Afterwards, they introduced him to me. He's the lieutenant governor of the state of Georgia. Wait, he's running for the governor's mansion in Georgia, a white man in an African-American church running on the Democratic ticket on faith and family values. So you got a black man running on a Republican ticket, a white man running on a Democratic ticket, but they're both standing on the foundation of the Word of God. That's what we're seeing in America. I left there and I went to Bishop Keith Butler's in Detroit, Michigan. You think we got church around here? You ain't seen no church. They have 4,000 every Thursday night. African American man, African American church, running for a seat, and he's ahead in all the polls right now, running for a seat in the United States Senate. An African-American man running for a seat in the United States Senate on the Republican ticket on a faith and families and culture of life platform. See, it doesn't matter what color you are, doesn't matter what church you're from, doesn't matter what denominational background, doesn't matter what political background you're from. What's happening here is just under the surface, and nobody gets it yet, but it's just about to break out because we're just about to take over. Every party. I left there. That night, the next morning, I was interviewed on a very large Christian network. This is a week I'm talking about here. And I'm not even telling you a third of it. The next morning I got up, was rushed to a television station for a large television network, and interviewing me was an African-American man who is the ABC anchor, 6 o'clock and 11 o'clock in Detroit. Now, there's a secular news anchor, 6 o'clock and 11 o'clock lead anchor in a huge city like Detroit, Michigan. He is the lead anchor on ABC. He's interviewing me. All of a sudden, he gets tears in his eyes about two-thirds of the way through the interview. And he says, I'm now to the chapter on Islam. Well, I don't know what he's going to give me because he's getting real emotional. And he said, now this chapter on Islam, he said, I have to tell you, this is the finest chapter on Islam I've ever read. Well, I think maybe he's just being a little flattering. He is interviewing me. I said, thank you very much. He said, no, you don't understand. I'm qualified to say that I believe that's the finest chapter on Islam that I've ever read. And here's why. Because Pastor Parsley, now he's got tears in his eyes. Pastor Parsley, what you don't know, sir, is that I was married to Louis Farrakhan's daughter